Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's seminar titled The Three Components of Family Governance, brought to us by the Chinese-Filipino Business Club, Inc. My name is Ryan Phoenix, and I will be your host and moderator for today. Today, we will hope to learn how to make a constitution for the family members of a business and to understand the common pitfalls and problem areas. To help us to do so is Attorney Kesterson of the Kua, C, and Yung Law Offices, or Sky Law. Just a quick reminder before we start for everyone to kindly please put their mics into mute mode so that we can hear our speakers better. If you do have any questions, please kindly type them anytime in the chat room. Attorney Kesterson will try to answer them after his lecture. Okay, so let's start by calling on the Vice President of the Chinese-Filipino Business Club, VP Samuel Uy, to tell us more about the CFBCI.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so happy that you are joining us on our CFBCI webinar. As an owner of a family business myself, it is so important to know the correct frameworks to follow in running a family corporation. We believe blood is thicker than water. It is our hope that through this webinar, broken relationship among siblings and loved ones can be avoided. To my two sons, I hope you are listening if you want to be promoted. For those who are not familiar with CFBCI, please give me a minute to introduce our organization and some of our projects. The Chinese-Filipino Business Club, Inc., or Huihua Kangxiong, is a nonprofit organization with 400 Chinese-Filipino members nationwide. Name a business, and it is likely that we have a member in that line of business. CFBCI celebrated its 20th anniversary successfully last February 9 and 10 at Manila Hotel with almost 1,000 guests and Mayor President Duterte as our keynote speaker. CFBCI has always been in the forefront of service to the Chinese-Filipino mainstream society. The organization has been collaborating with various government agencies to bring prosperity to the country and its people. Allow me to cite two of our noteworthy efforts. One, CFBCI was instrumental in the approval of the Naturalization Law of 2000. Two, during the Marawi siege 2 years ago, CFBCI came up with a project to assist the government by constructing 110 immediate shelters for the displaced people of Marawi. Instead of criticizing the government, CFBCI looks for ways
a long time ago. Yeah, I had the letter.
CFBCI provides assistance to PNP with donations from real.
VP Samuel, I think we are having a bit of a technical difficulty. Can you please unmute yourself, VP Samuel?
Okay. It provides free computer lessons through its many Van Aralan. It conducts tree planting, bloodletting, as well as medical and dental missions. Aside from donating deep wells, it also initiates annual dengue fumigation. CFBCI does relief operations to victims of disasters and calamities. To support the plight of the poor due to ECQ last May, it donated 10 truckloads of food items to 5 major cities in Metro Manila. The Chinese-Filipino Business Club, Inc. is continuously coming up with new ways to be of help to the government and be a blessing to as many people as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, VP Samuel, for that introduction. Next up, let's hear a pre-recorded speech by our President, President Alejandro Co.
Fellow CFBCI College participants of today's webinar, friends, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to our webinar on the three components of family governance, organized by the Chinese Filipino Business Club Incorporated through its Young Entrepreneur Committee. Over the years, CFBCI has been committed in promoting and nurturing our MSME through various seminars and lectures, as well as holding livelihood seminar with the ongoing community quarantine. Our club has decided to level up our passion of promoting entrepreneurship through webinar while keeping pace with the new normal and continuing our advocacy. In the Philippines, 80% of business are family-owned. Close family tie has always been part of our tradition. However, the inevitable departure by this means and by generational rotation of the most family enterprise sometimes lead to disputes. This is the reason why we are offering this topic to avoid misunderstanding within the family and promote harmonious relationship while protecting everyone's interest. Hopefully, this event will encourage further camaraderie, strong hope bonds, and exchange of ideas not only among our members but with all the participants as well. As one of the leading business organizations in Chinese Filipino society, it is my sincere hope that despite this pandemic, we continue to move forward in unity to promote Chinese culture and values. There is hope, no matter how hard the situation could be. That say, as everyone is already excited to listen to the show, I will not take any more of your time. Thank you and God bless.
Thank you, Mr. President. Now to finally introduce our main speaker, may we call on VP Gerald Chan.
Yeah, it is my pleasure to introduce the CFBCI Board Secretary, Attorney Kesterson. He is one of the founding partners of Sky Law, where he handles labor, immigration, and estate law. He took up his undergraduate studies from University of the Philippines, School of Economics, where he graduated magna cum laude. Thereafter, he entered the UP College of Law, where he represented the Philippines in various international moot court competition. Upon graduating from UP Law, he then entered the country's biggest law firm, Accra, as an associate. Then in 2017, he founded the Sky Law offices. College of Law. Let's all welcome Attorney Kesterson.
Attorney, you have the floor.
Okay, so hello, good afternoon. Thank you, VP Gerald, for that kind introduction. Thank you as well to our president for giving me this chance to speak to everyone today. Again, I'm Kesterson, and today we're going to talk about family constitutions, okay, and how to preserve the family in the midst of business. So I'm going to share my screen right now. I hope you can see it. So, okay. So originally, I was just going to talk about three components of family governance. But as I was preparing and preparing, I realized that it would be very difficult to limit it to just three components. No? So we will be talking about it in a general point of view, and hopefully this can assist you, especially those companies or those families that are under transition right now, or are looking to transition to the next generation soon. Okay. So first, let me begin by the statement, Fu Putai, Puko Santai. In English, it is wealth does not pass three generations. Unfortunately, this saying is not limited to the Chinese. The same saying can be found in almost every entrepreneurial culture in the world. Okay, in the States, in Europe, we find statements like this, and for good reason. Why? Simply because it's true. Okay, without intervention, without any assistance, left to their own devices, unfortunately, most of the time, family businesses will fail after several generations. Okay, let me begin by telling all of you a story. Okay, and this is actually this is a textbook case study for family constitutions. A very popular family, all the ladies, all the aunties especially, I'm sure you know them. This is the Gucci family, okay? So whenever my wife says the word Gucci, I get scared. My heart skips a beat because it means my bank account is gonna be deducted. No? But anyways, we're going to talk about the Gucci family, okay? So the Gucci family is obviously the family who started the Gucci brand, the Gucci luxury brand. So it all began really with one guy, and his name was Guccio Gucci. He was the grandfather, okay? He was Guccio Gucci. He started the Gucci brand, and he started it from scrap, okay? He was the typical rags to riches self-made person. So originally, Guccio Gucci was just a bellman, okay? He was just a bellboy, a bellhop in the Savoy Hotel in London, okay, when he was young. Now, while he was working in the hotel, he realized how important the luggage were to the rich and famous, okay? Because the Savoy Hotel was a very prestigious hotel. So he saw how all these A-list actors, how all the rich people would treat their luggages with so much importance, and how it was actually a status symbol. So with that, Guccio Gucci decided to enter a leather workshop as an apprentice. And there he learned the trade of how to make leather goods. So later on, after perfecting his craft, he decided to go back to Florence. Okay, he went to Florence, opened up shop, and all he made were exclusive, high-end Italian leather products. He stamped his name in, and it became very famous. Okay, that's how Gucci, the brand, really started. Okay, now Guccio Gucci was not well educated. He was really from rags, literally from rags. He was just a bellboy before. He was rags to riches. In Florence, he did very well. Okay, this was in the 1800s, no. So in Florence, he did very well. He had a very, very nice shop. And he managed the company well until his late 80s, I believe. Okay. Now, Guccio Gucci had 4 main children. Okay. He had 1 daughter, Grimalda, and then 3 sons, Aldo, Vasco, and Rodolfo. Now, at that time, when it was time to pass over the reins of the company, Guccio Gucci decided to pass it on to his 3 sons, Aldo, Vasco, and Rodolfo. Now, when it was passed on to Aldo and to Vasco and to Rodolfo, Aldo became the president of Gucci, okay? And Aldo, being the eldest, was considered to be the superstar of the luxury brand of high-end fashion at the time, okay? In fact, although the Gucci brand started with Guccio Gucci and it became popular under Guccio Gucci, it was actually Aldo who made it international, who made the brand international, who globalized Gucci as a brand. Under Aldo's leadership, they opened up stores, flagship stores in New York, in Paris, in London, okay? Because before it was just a Florence brand. And under Aldo, he was considered really a genius in marketing and sales. So he opened up shop in New York, Paris, London, later on Tokyo, all the major cities in the world. Okay, in fact, he was the one who really started the Gucci craze in the United States. Okay, it was Aldo. Now, Aldo had 3 children: Paolo, Roberto, and Giorgio. His brother, Vasco, did not have any children, although he was married, did not have any children. And his other brother, Rodolfo, had only one son, Mauricio. Okay. Now, everything was fine when it was, when the company was being handled by Aldo, Vasco, and Rodolfo. Okay. And they handled the company until around 1970s. Okay. So everything seemed fine. But then problems started to arise when Aldo's son, Paolo, wanted to set up his own brand. Okay, because at this point in time, the Gucci name was already very, very prestigious and very, very valuable. So what Paolo wanted, Paolo is a designer, by the way. So what Paolo wanted was to create his own brand, Paolo Gucci accessories. Okay. Unfortunately for Paolo, Aldo, his uncle Rodolfo, and his father Aldo did not agree to him setting up his own brand. They wanted to keep the Gucci brand in the family. So what did Paolo do? Instead of complying with his father and his uncle's wishes, what Paolo did was to file a case against his father and his uncle. What he did was he reported his own father to the government for tax evasion. He showed them all the documents that the prosecution can use to prosecute Aldo. And believe it or not, Aldo actually went to jail because of what Paolo did. And you know at what age Aldo went to jail? Aldo went to jail at 81 years old. And it was because of his son, Paolo. Okay, so this all started when Paolo wanted to set up his own brand. Now, what about Rodolfo's son, Mauricio? You would think that Mauricio would be the good son, that he would take over the family business. But no, actually, Mauricio followed after his cousin, Paolo. And in fact, for a short while, they teamed up. Mauricio and Paolo teamed up in an attempt to take over the Gucci family corporation, the Gucci family business, even though their own fathers were still in control. And they filed case after case after case. Okay. Ultimately, Paolo and Mauricio had a fight and they went their separate ways. And later on in the 1980s, Mauricio was able to successfully take over control of the Gucci family corporation. However, Mauricio's reign as president and as majority shareholder was not long, and in fact was not really considered successful. In fact, in the early 1990s, in 1991, I think, or 1992, Mauricio basically ran the Gucci family empire to the ground to the point that they were severely in debt and they had no choice. The Gucci family had no choice but to sell 50%, okay, of their stake to another corporation, to Investocorp, okay? And Investocorp is a Middle Eastern holding company, okay? And that was in the 1990s because Mauricio ran it to the ground. He did not have the business acumen of his father and his uncle. Right now, Gucci is no longer owned by the Gucci family. In fact, Gucci right now is owned by a French company called Kering. Kering is also the owner of YSL, of Bottega, and of Bottega Veneta. Okay, so Gucci was a very illustrious family, but right now, sad to say, they are a textbook case on dysfunction in the family and in the family business. All in all, the number of cases that were filed within the Gucci family was 18. In fact, for Mauricio, there's a further story to Mauricio. In fact, for Mauricio, he was assassinated later on in his life. After selling their shares in 1991, I think in 1995 or 1994, Mauricio was actually assassinated by hired gunmen who were hired by his wife. Okay. So this is actually called the Gucci family curse. Okay. And it's a textbook example of how business and family can go wrong so easily. Okay. Again, right now, Gucci as a brand is no longer owned, no longer controlled by the Gucci family, but rather it is owned and controlled by a French company, Kering. Now, that being said, let's go to some facts, to some sad facts. And the truth of the matter is 70% of all wealth transfers will fail. Okay? This is a fact that is found all across the globe, not only in Asia. Okay? 70% of all wealth transfers will fail. And 90% of the time, it is because of these four major issues. First one is lack of trust. Second one is not having a clear purpose for their wealth. Third one is poor communication. And then the last one is the next generation not being ready. Okay? And we see all of these elements of failure in the Gucci family. Okay, you see, first of all, for lack of trust. For lack of trust, trust is easy when it is the first generation. It is easy for the second generation, but it is very difficult for the third generation, especially if they don't have a clear purpose for their wealth. Because normally, the first generation earns the money, the second generation builds it up, and unfortunately, sometimes the third generation does not know what to do with it. Okay. Next is poor communication. We will discuss this later on. I have better examples in the later part of the presentation. But the next point is equally important, which is that the next generation is not yet ready. I know we come at a time where a lot of the young people are very energetic, they're very enthusiastic in succeeding their parents or their grandparents in the family business. However, just a fair warning to all the young people. Sometimes we, as young people, may not realize that we're not yet ready. We think we know everything. Unfortunately, history shows that we may actually be wrong. Okay, so these are the four main problems with wealth transfers. Now, some hard facts for intergenerational survival. The rate of success for succession to the second generation normally is 30%. For it to move on to the third generation, the rate of success is actually less than 15%. And moving on for a corporation, for a family corporation to survive until the fourth generation, based on an American study, the rate of success is actually less than 5%. Okay, so these are the numbers that we're facing, that all of us with family businesses are facing. And this is not limited, again, to the Philippines, to the Chinese, to Asia. It's a global issue. Now, in the Philippines, some facts, 80% of all companies in the Philippines are family-owned. In fact, if we take a look at the top 30 listed companies in the Philippine Stock Exchange, you will notice that more than 80% of them actually are family-owned corporations. You have SM, you have Robinsons, you have Aboitiz, you have Ayala, you have Mega World. All of these and these are major players in the Philippines. All of them are still family-owned corporations in essence. We have very few true conglomerates. No, probably one of the few true conglomerates we have is San Miguel. Okay, but even that is debatable. Now, that being said, what's the solution to what should you do to increase the rate of survival of intergenerational change, of intergenerational succession? Actually, there's a very simple answer to that. And it's a family constitution. Okay? It's really a family constitution. So what is a family constitution, by the way? In its strict definition, a family constitution is a formal document that sets out the rights, values, responsibilities, and rules applying to family members. It also provides plans and structures to deal with situations that arise in the course of family business operations. Okay, so that's a lot of definition, but in essence, okay, at its core, a family constitution is simply a guideline for the next generation to use in determining family business decisions. Okay, in fact, not just family business decisions, but family decisions as well. Okay, so again, a family constitution, if you take out all the fluff, in essence, it is basically a set of rules that will serve as a guideline for the next generation to decide on how to run the family and the family business. Okay, so it's just a set of rules. It's not, a lot of people, especially the Filipino Chinese, have a hesitancy, okay, have a lot of hesitance towards family constitution because they feel like it's very rigid, they feel like it's very formal, they feel like it's very legal. When in fact, in its true essence, it's really very simple. It's just a set of rules, a set of principles for the next generation to have direction on. Okay. Now, what are the benefits of a family constitution? Okay. The first one is to manage expectations. Okay. The second one is to avoid misunderstandings. Okay. The third one, the third benefit of family constitution, and it is very important, is to specify the roles and responsibilities of all the heirs. Next benefit is that it will foster greater harmony among the heirs. And lastly, the most important of all, is that having a family constitution will help resolve issues within the family. Okay? So these are the main benefits of a family constitution: to manage expectations, to avoid misunderstandings, to specify roles and responsibilities, to foster greater harmony, and most of all, to resolve issues in the family business and in the family. Okay? Now, what is the most important element of a family constitution? A lot of people ask me, attorney, what is the one single most important element in drafting a family constitution? We don't know where to start. Okay, we don't know where to start. How do we start? Okay, and this is really the secret to everything. Okay, and the secret is that the entire family must do this in an open and collaborative manner. Okay, in other words, when drafting a family constitution, you don't expect that a family constitution will be finished in one day or even 1 week or even 1 month. Okay, why? Because again, a family constitution is supposed to be open and collaborative in nature. In other words, it is not just the patriarch, it is not just the matriarch, it is not just the parents or the grandparents who will call up a lawyer and say, attorney, draft us a family constitution. This is what I want. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, it doesn't work that way. Or at the very least, a good family constitution will not work that way. Okay, why? Because for a family constitution to work, you need all members of the family to come to an agreement. Okay, again, let me repeat that. For a good family constitution to work, you need all members of the family to agree on a certain set of guidelines, on a certain set of principles. That is the minimum basic requirement. Okay? So if the family is already fighting, and sad to say, we know that that's very common. If there's already infighting within the company, then the solution is not to immediately draft a family constitution and then force everyone to sign. That's not a solution. The solution is to first resolve the issue. Okay. Now, if there's an issue and you want to start drafting a family constitution, that can be part of the process. Okay. Trying to draft a family constitution may be a part of the process of healing. It may be a part of the process of getting the people, the members on friendly terms again. But take note, it is not the end goal. Okay. The family constitution is not a miracle drug. Okay. So the first step in a family constitution really is to sit down and talk with everybody. Okay. Of course, the parents, the patriarch and the matriarch will have a strong say. They will have a strong voice. That's a given. However, they cannot dominate. Okay. They cannot dominate the formulation of the family constitution. And I'll give you just one very practical reason why. Okay? Why the patriarch or the matriarch should not dominate the discussion. Simply because for the uncles and aunties out there, take note that the family constitution is not for your benefit, actually. Okay? Because honestly, as long as you're still in control, I doubt that family constitution will come into play because you still have the legal and moral right over the family and over your business. The family constitution actually comes into play, into very important play, when the next generation starts taking over. Okay, and we'll discuss that later on why. But basically, take note again. In starting a family constitution, it must be an open, collaborative effort. So normally, when a client approaches us and tells us, attorney, we want to set up a family constitution, the first thing we do is really ask all the family members to either come to our office where we have a big conference room, or we will ask all of them for one meeting, for an initial meeting with all of them, either in a resort, in a hotel function room, or at the parents' house. We do not recommend doing it in one of the kids' houses. No, we recommend doing it in a neutral place. Although if hindi kaya ng neutral place, then the next option would be the patriarch or the matriarch's house. Okay? But again, I'm sorry I'm spending a lot of time here, but this is really the most important point. Okay? And if you forget everything else I say today, just don't forget this. If you want to make a successful family constitution, the first step is really to sit down and talk with everybody. Figure out with everybody what it is that they want, as both as a family and as an individual. Because sometimes you might be surprised that what they want are completely different. And if what they want are completely different, then that will affect the contents of your family constitution. Now that being said, let's go to the main topic. What are the components of a family constitution? Okay. Now there are many components, and you have to understand there is no one. A family constitution is not like a normal legal document where it is a template. No. So a family constitution is actually made on a case-to-case basis. It is not a one-size-fits-all. Okay. So it must be tailor-made to the family. Does it have to be very long? Not necessarily. Do you need a lawyer to make it for you? Not necessarily. Do you need an outsider to assist you in doing it? Again, not necessarily. You may get a lawyer, you may get outside assistance, but actually it's not necessary, because as long as everybody in the family consents or agrees to it, then you can already make your own family constitution. Okay. So what are the important components? Okay. So first one is mission and vision for the business. Second is core family values. Third, employment and compensation. Fourth, family benefits. Fifth, ownership and dividends. Sixth, company management. And seventh, governance. At least for me, these are the 7 most important components that every family constitution should have. Okay? So first, let's discuss mission and vision for the business. In deciding what the mission and vision for the business is, the main question to ask is, what is your goal as a business? Not just short-term, but also long-term. What is your goal? What is the reason why the business was formed? How do you want the business to be 10 years from now, 20 years from now, or even 50 years from now? How do you envision your business? Okay? Do you want to go public, or do you want to stay as a private company? Do you have plans of expanding abroad? Is that something that is very important to you right now, that the future generation make sure they expand abroad? Is the business a legacy business, meaning it is more important that it be maintained because of reputation, or is it more a profit-oriented business, meaning what you are after is the economic returns of the business? These are the things that you have to discuss as a family. Okay? Very simple. Legacy, whether it's a legacy business or a profit business. Why is it important to discuss this? It's important because your heirs, your descendants must have a guideline on what to do in case business is bad. In case business is bad, should they take out a loan and risk it? Should they put in more capital? Or if it's already bad, should they just call it quits? Because anyways, it's not a legacy business. Okay, so next is, do you want to go public or do you want to stay as a private company? Again, these are things that must be mentioned in the mission and vision of the business, because the future leaders of the business will now depend on the mission and vision of the family. Okay, because the way they will have to grow the business will be very different. And remember, each of your children or each of your descendants may have very different opinions. But if you have a common mission vision to tie them all together, then at the very least, they have one clear guideline on what the goal is. If everyone knows the goal is to go public, to have an IPO, then everyone will be more, most likely everyone will be more open to the idea of having outside or professional management come in. If you have plans of expanding abroad, then at least everyone is on the same page. They know that dividends might not be as big because you need more capital to expand abroad. One of the nicest mission and vision statements I find in the Philippines, especially among the Filipino Chinese community, is the mission and vision statement by SL Agritech. Okay, the company behind Doña Maria Rice. It's a part of the Sterling Group. So for SL Agritech, their vision is to be the world leading producer of hybrid rice. And one of their mission statements is to achieve rice sufficiency and conquer world hunger. So you see, it's very clear for SL Agritech what their mission and vision is. They clearly stated already the vision that although they are an agricultural technology company, their main anchor is rice, specifically hybrid rice. Also, they already made it very clear that their main goal, their main mission is to conquer world hunger. Not just national, not just the Philippine hunger, but world hunger through rice, okay? So this makes it very clear now, both as a company and as a family, on what the vision, what the goals are of the company. Next, let's talk about core family values. So earlier, the first one is the mission and vision for the business. Now, it's very important that that you as a family also come into an agreement on what your core family values are. What are the things that you as a family, as a business family in particular, is not willing to compromise on? Okay? What are the guiding principles that you want to lead your family? Let's go into specifics here. Okay, at least for my firm, for core family values, one very important thing we ask our clients is, dear blank family, what are the industries that you do not want to go into? What are the industries that you will prohibit the future generation from going into? For example, are you willing to let the family go into the disco or the bar business? Are you willing to go into, let's say, the arms, okay, guns, military arms business? Are you willing to go into liquor production? Are you willing to go into gambling businesses? Are pogos part of your future? These are important questions to ask and important decisions to be made, so that your future generation will have a clear family value, on clear values of the family, basically, so that they will know, okay, we're not allowed to expand here in this industry. Dad does not want us to go into gambling. So even though there's a very good opportunity, we're going to let it go. We're not going to take it. Okay. Next thing. So the first thing I always ask my clients is, number one, for your core family values, what are the industries you do not want to go in? Then number two, what is your policy on education? Is education an important family value? in the business, because it will now affect a whole, it will now affect the entire constitution later on, because it will affect whether or not basically it will affect qualifications for entering into the family business. Is it required that they be college graduates? Is it required that they have a master's degree? Is it required that they have a doctorate degree? Next core family value is charity and philanthropic pursuits. What is your stance as a family on charity and philanthropic pursuits? Is it very important? Because I know this is very important for certain families. And if it is very important for your family, then better put it down in writing. Put it down as a core family value, so that the future generation will not have to fight on whether or not how much to give. Because you already clearly stated that charity or philanthropic endeavors are an important family value. Next, and very, very important aspect of core family value is religion. Okay, and I know a lot of families have fought tooth and nail over this. What is your family value with regards to religion? I know a lot of families are supporting churches. A lot of families are supporting temples. Is this something that you want to continue? Because if yes, then better put it in the family constitution. Otherwise, one day you might be disappointed to see that your family members are now composed of many different religions, and a significant group is now not willing to continue your charitable causes to that religious endeavor. Okay, so actually, the most important aspect of a family constitution are these two. Number one is the mission and vision for the business, and number two are the core family values. Okay, these are the two most important. Okay, next important element after the first two is employment and compensation. Okay, and again, this is also a very, very touchy topic, a very, very difficult topic to talk about. Who can be employed in the family business? What are the conditions for employment? There are many different ways to do this. And again, I have to emphasize a family constitution. This is one of the reasons why a family constitution cannot be a template. You cannot just copy and paste someone else's family constitution. This is why you need to make your own, because each family will have different conditions for employment. Okay. First of all, when talking about employment and compensation, the first question you have to ask is, who is allowed to be employed in the family business? Okay. Is it limited to direct descendants? What about in-laws? What about adopted children? What about illegitimate children? What about second families? Are they allowed to be employed in the family business? These are things that you have to decide on early. Okay. Next question to ask for employment is, what age and qualification is required? How old are they required to enter the family business? Do you allow them to enter at 18 years old, right out of college? Or do you require them to work outside first for a certain number of years? What is the qualification? Do you require them to have passed, to have finished college, to have taken masters, to have taken a doctorate? Those are the questions you need to ask for qualification. And lastly, for employment and compensation, you have to ask, what are the roles in the family business that I want to give to my descendants? Okay, because this is actually a very common problem of the second generation. You have to identify the roles, the different roles in the family business. Because, for example, the big brother or the anya might be president. Then the second brother might be the corporate secretary. Then the third brother or the third sister might be the treasurer. Now, you have to specify at this point in time very clearly what their roles are and what is expected of them. Because oftentimes people fight when it is not clear what their expectation is. Okay? When it is not clear what is expected of them. For example, as a president, what is expected of the president? As a treasurer, what is expected of the treasurer? Is it simply checking the bank accounts? Or does it include getting loans? Does it include networking with banks, with financial institutions? You have to be very clear on what the roles are. Okay? Because otherwise, mag-aaway talaga kayo. Okay? Mag-aaway talaga. Also, at this point, we also have to talk about compensation. How much will each role be compensated? And here I want to mention one thing. My personal opinion lang is fairness does not necessarily mean equality. Okay, there's a difference between fairness and equality. What may be fair may not necessarily be equal. Okay, let me repeat that. When you draft your family constitution, take note that what may be fair might not necessarily be equal. In other words, not every sibling might have to get the equal compensation because after all, they're doing different things. And when you compensate someone below what they are supposed to get, that is when resentment, that is when ugly feelings start to come out. Okay. Now, some recommendations for employment and compensation. Okay, just from our experience. Number one, I would highly recommend that you require the next generation to do summer work in the company business. So this would normally apply to the third generation. If you're the founder, this would normally apply to your third generation. I would recommend that you make it a rule in the family constitution that all the third generation kids are required to work during the summer in the family business. Why? Because that way they will know what the family business is, they can be better educated, and they will be better informed on what the family business is doing. Instead of just having a vague idea that, hey, we have a company, this is our product. If they actually go work for the company, they will know how it operates, and they will have a better understanding of whether they want to be part of the company or not. Second recommendation in this aspect is I would recommend that you require your descendants, especially the third generation, to work outside for a period of time, at least 2 years, okay? At least 2 years, just so that they have outside experience. I really do not recommend clients to allow their descendants to immediately come in the family business. Also, and this is my last recommendation for employment, no? I do not recommend the style of certain family businesses where one branch per family or one family branch is in control of one department or one business unit. Okay, so for example, the second brothers, let's say the first brother's family will always be president, the second brother's family will always be in charge of finances, the third brother's family will always be in charge of operations. I do not recommend that. That is a recipe for disaster. Instead, what I recommend is number one, base roles. Make sure you base roles on merit. Okay. Make sure you put the right person in the job. Okay. And second, as much as possible, place different branches, different members of different family branches in different business units, in different departments, just so that there is a check and balance. And just so that trust can be built among the family branches, because they know that, they know what's happening in that department, they know what's happening in that business unit. Okay? Next aspect or next component, is family benefits. Okay, this is something I highly encourage you to think about. So what family benefits? The question you have to ask is, what are the benefits that the family members will enjoy? Okay. Now, in considering family benefits, you have to think a little bit longer in the long term. Okay. Di na ba kung family benefit o di tiyo siyong kakagtampo. Kana. Let me go into Chinese for a brief moment here. Okay, this is very important for me. Din mang siyo, din ay ginalang, din mang siyo, din ay sunlang, din na ba song family constitution no? Din na sito kay si siyo, din ay tay sitay, tay gotay. And din nakaw din ate si tay go tayo. Uko ng uko ng bolong chong letso kong sila. Bolong chong ti kong sila in. In fact, tua po ko no in bueti tiam kong sila in letso sit ko. So tua po ko in si kai kitso sang di asi in tiam gwa kao letso sit. Now, the question is, din yako ba in siya benefits? What are the minimum benefits that you are going to give these people? Okay, so for the non-Chinese speaking audience, what I said earlier is, in discussing family benefits, the minimum family benefits, you have to think on a longer period. You shouldn't just think about it from the perspective of your children and your grandchildren. Think of it in the perspective of the fourth generation and the fifth generation. What are the minimum family benefits that you want to extend to them? Okay, because by the time that in case or in the event that your business survives until the fourth and fifth generation, most likely not all of them will be working for the family business. It's just physically impossible that the entirety of the fourth and fifth generation will be working for the family business. Okay, so most of them will probably have their own paths in life. They will be working outside. They might have their own business. Now, what are the benefits you want to extend to them? Some of them, and let me tell you, by that time, inequality will be very, very rampant. Not everybody will be on the same page financially. Some will be better off than others. So in that case, with that perspective, that for your descendants, some will be better off than others, I recommend that you include a portion in the family constitution on minimum family benefits. So examples of the family benefits, and what I recommend clients is, maybe you can input, maybe the family can agree that no matter what happens, our own people will be taken care of. No matter what happens, each person will be given, let's say, one condominium unit. Each person the family business will make sure that each person has the minimum amount needed to survive, either through a cash allowance or maybe through, we had one case where there was really, I'm sorry to use the term, I don't like using the term, but to give a clearer idea, where the family felt that there was one black sheep in the family, okay? But the grandparents was not willing to just kick them out. So we included a provision in the family benefits that the family business will always take care of the needs of this black sheep. Even though he was a drug addict, even though he was a gambling addict, the basic needs will be met. Okay, so what we did was the company would buy a condominium unit, a small condominium unit, for him to use. Okay, the title will remain with the company, just the benefit, just the use will be given to him. And then every month, a certain amount of groceries, not cash, will be given to him. Okay, so this is one thing that you might want to consider, just to ensure that all their descendants will be, at the very least, taken care of. Okay. Next component is ownership and dividends. Okay, and this is again also very, very important, and you have to talk about this. Ownership and dividends. Who can be an owner in your company? Is it, like, again, limited, similar to employment? Is it limited? Is ownership, is shareholding limited to direct descendants? What about in-laws? What about illegitimate children? What about adopted children? What about long-term partners? Okay. Recently, one of the questions that were asked with our firm was how a family was going to handle a homosexual relationship. So a gay relationship with one of their descendants. Since they're not allowed to marry in the Philippines, how are they going to handle that? Okay, so those are some things you have to consider. Okay, who is allowed to own your shares? Okay, and again, this is tied very closly to your mission vision, because if you want to go public in an IPO, then you have to be more lax with the ownership rules. Okay. Also important, also tied up here is the issue on dividends. Okay, what are the rules on dividends? This is a very important question to ask, and a very financial footing. It is very common, okay, that one brother or one sibling is very well off while the others are not, okay? Especially if they married into a very well-off family, then the discrepancy, okay, the wealth inequality will be very, very high, okay? And now you might arrive at a scenario where the eldest brother is very well off, and let's say he's the president. But the shorty, the youngest brother, is not as well off, okay? Because let's say he did not marry into a very rich family. Now, the problem is with dividends. Ahia, or the eldest brother, wants to expand aggressively. But shorty, or the youngest brother, wants more dividends right now because he needs it, okay? How are you going to solve that now? Okay? How are you going to solve that now? So it is best to include guidelines at least on dividends. Okay, we're going to end soon, no? So bear with me. Sorry, medyo madaldal ako. Company management, next aspect, next component that is very important. Who will manage the company? How do we make business decisions? Okay, so who will manage the company? Do you want to keep the, again, very closely tied into ownership? Do you want the company to be solely managed by family members, or do you allow professional management to come in? How do you make business decisions? Is simple majority enough? Or do you require super majority? Or maybe you even require unanimity in making decisions. These are the things that you have to decide on in discussing company management. Now, the last and possibly next most important after family values is family governance, okay? Earlier, we talked about company management, or on how the family is going to manage the company. Now, we're going to talk about family governance. In other words, family governance means how they're going to govern or manage the family naman. Okay, kanina business. Now, we're talking about how you will manage the family. Because as your family grows, as the cousins grow, as the first and second degree cousins grow, you expect naturally that there will be fights, that there will be tampuhan, that there will be issues, okay? You do not expect that everything will always be sunshine and roses, okay? It's given. People will fight because people will always have a difference in opinion, okay? But the question now is, what are you going to do about it, okay? What is the current generation going to do about it? And the solution to that is really family governance, okay? So family governance is basically conflict resolution. How are you going to resolve conflict? And what I recommend, okay, to most clients is that we must set up a family council or a clan, okay, a clan council, okay? Either a family council or a clan council. And what is the job of this council? The job of this council, separate from the business, the job of this council is to make sure that the family stays together. That if there are issues, it can be brought up to the family or to the clan council, and the family or the clan council will decide on it, and their decision will be respected by both parties. Okay, that's what I normally recommend. And what I recommend for family councils or clan councils is that it must be composed of representatives from each branch. Okay, so at least one representative from each branch, with the chairpersonship moving around every year or every 2 years, okay? So you can think of the family council as the arbitrator of the family. They will decide, let's say A and B got into a fight. They will be the one to decide who was at wrong and what to do, how to resolve it, okay? Now, some common issues. We're going to end soon, I promise. Some common issues with family constitutions. Number one, forced participation. I spoke about this earlier, okay? Again, a family constitution is not something you just call up your lawyer and then tell them, attorney, make me a family constitution. Can we have it by next week or by next month? Doesn't work that way, okay? Because if what you're doing is you're forcing, if what your plan is to force all your siblings or all your children to simply sign that family constitution, I guarantee you, the moment you're gone, that constitution is only going to be a piece of paper, okay? And take note, I forgot to mention this. A family constitution may or may not be legally binding. In fact, normally, most of the time, a family constitution is not legally binding. Normally, a family constitution is not legally binding. That is why, aside from a family constitution, we often draft a shareholders agreement for the current shareholders to sign. Okay, the shareholders agreement will basically include all the provisions in the family constitution that can be legally enforceable. But take note, not everything is legally enforceable. Okay, so for example, legally, we often include this in the shareholders agreement, the right of first refusal. Okay, so for example, if a descendant or an heir wants to sell their shares, they have to first offer it to either the company or to the siblings or to other shareholders. Okay, so that's an example of a legally enforceable provision of the family constitution. However, some things naman are not legally enforceable. Okay, for example, if you include a provision in the family constitution that they cannot marry, that your children or your descendants cannot marry a certain religion, a certain race, or a certain age or gender, that's not allowed. Okay, that's not legally enforceable. Okay, so take note, we cannot force participation. We cannot brute force our heirs to just simply sign a family constitution, because it will defeat the purpose. Because in the end, they will just fight again, and it will be lawyer versus lawyer. They will be armed with their own law firms. And believe me, as a lawyer, that's not a good solution. That's really not a good solution. Personally, and as a policy, as a guiding principle of my firm, Sky Law, we discourage lawsuits. As much as possible, we tell our clients, let's settle outside the courts. Simply because number one, it will take so long to win. And number two, the only ones who will really benefit from it financially are us, the lawyers. No? So first common issue, forced participation. Second common issue, cultural differences. Okay? And we often see this with family members or with heirs who grew up in different territories. Okay? So for example, some grew up in the Philippines, some grew up in China, some grew up in Canada. That's a very common, for some reason, that's a very common setup. Sad to say, we often have problems with those kinds of setups. Okay? Because suddenly, everyone wants to come into the business and they each have their own opinions and have different ways of doing things. Okay? So cultural differences is really a major issue. Third common issue is loans and advances. How do you treat loans and advances? Okay? Do you allow loans and advances between family members? Do you encourage it or do you not encourage it? Do you allow loans and advances between an heir and the company? That's another thing to discuss. Okay? And if you do allow loans and advances, what is the limit? Okay, personally, I try to discourage clients from allowing loans and advances among family members unless it is in writing. Okay, unless it is in writing, because otherwise it will really give a very big problem. And normally we submit that loan agreement. We tell them that that loan agreement should be, that other family members should be informed of that loan agreement, so that there will be no miscommunication. Okay. Fourth common issue is the non-compete clause. Okay. A non-compete clause basically provides that the heirs are not allowed to compete with the family business. They're not allowed to open their own business. They're not allowed to work for competitors. And the question with non-compete clauses, mainly two things. First is, how do you define the family business? Okay, or how broad is your non-compete? if you're into the steel industry, are they allowed to go into, let's say, steel cabinet manufacturing? Diba? If you're into the tile business, do you allow your heirs to individually go into, let's say, the marble business? That's the first thing you have to clarify. How broad is your non-compete? Okay. Also, you have to discuss, are heirs allowed to be a supplier to the family business? That's a common issue, right? Are heirs allowed to be a supplier to the family business? Because sometimes, and we've encountered this, where there's a family of 3, I think. Yeah, there were 3 of them. Their own business of raw materials, plastic pellets, and then he started supplying. Still, the 3 of them, that was okay because they all agreed. They started questioning, is that allowed? Okay. They started questioning, is that allowed? The defense of the one supplying is, hey, I'm giving you a very good deal. Okay, you can't get a better deal than this. But the others are saying that's still, whether or not that's a good deal, that's a conflict of interest. Okay? So that's one thing to consider. How broad is your non-compete? Second thing to consider when you discuss non-compete clauses with your family is, what about in-laws? Okay, I know in-laws is a very big concern, especially for the Phil-Chai community. But what about in-laws? What if your son gets married to the daughter of a competitor? How are you going to handle that as a family? Is the in-law still allowed to join family business meetings? Is the in-law allowed to work in the family business? Assuming they come from a competing business. Okay, those are things you have to discuss. Next common issue is, when will the next generation join? In other words, succession planning. Okay, again, and I expect there will be a lot of questions on succession planning later on in the Q&A. But just take note again what I said earlier when we started. For the next generation, for the young people, don't be so eager. Just a lesson I learned personally. Don't be so eager to take over the reins. Because honestly, sometimes there is no substitute for experience. Okay, you might think that your parents or your grandparents' styles are outdated, and I agree. I completely agree. Most of the times they are. Okay, it may be outdated, but just because it's outdated does not necessarily mean it's wrong. Okay? Just because it's outdated does not necessarily mean it's wrong. And for succession planning, it has to be done slowly. Okay, that's the best advice, the general advice that I can give for succession planning, which is that it must be done gradually. It is not as if someone will come in and then suddenly the baton will be passed to the next generation. No, it doesn't work that way. So normally, the older generation will be in the top management position, while the younger generation will be coming in as the mid-management, okay? So that they can learn from if not from the start, then at least from the middle up. Now, and last common issue is defining who the family is, who a family member is. Sounds weird, no? Parang, attorney, mabilis lang naman i-define ng family. Actually, it's not. It's very difficult. Okay? Because, again, what about illegitimate children? For the purposes of defining family for the family constitution, it's very difficult. How do you characterize illegitimate children? How do you characterize ex-wives, ex-husbands? Diba? How do you characterize adopted children? How do you characterize long-term partners? These are common issues troubling families. So just some last words before I end. Number 1, the right successor may not necessarily be your child. Okay? Please take note of that. The right successor might not necessarily be your child. In fact, oftentimes it is not, especially if you're in the third generation or the fourth generation, professional management might be more preferable. Next is not every family member is fit to work for the family business. And I cannot repeat this enough. I always try to impress upon my clients that make sure you base employment and you base compensation on merit, not on blood, but on merit. Because for blood, that's where the minimum family benefits come into play. Okay. And anyways, just because they're not working for the family business does not mean that they don't own shares. Okay. You have to differentiate the two. Okay. Ownership and working in the family business are two completely separate items. Okay. So your descendants may be owners, okay, because that's the birthright. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they are fit to work in the family business. Okay. Next, I would suggest, of course, is to get good external advisors, whether it's a long-time advisor of the family or maybe a fairly new, young, that is a trusted advisor. And ideally, I recommend getting more than one, especially if you plan to include them as part of the family council. Okay. By the way, for the family council, which I mentioned earlier, it is not limited. You can put in a provision where advisors can be a part of the family council, so that it is not 100% subjective. Okay. So normally, I would recommend at least one advisor, ideally around 3 advisors to the family, assuming it's a big corporation or a big family. Fourth, constantly review the family constitution. Take note that the family constitution is supposed to be an evolving document. Okay. Why? Because times change, needs change, businesses change, demands change, markets change. The only thing absolute in life is change and death, apparently. No? So the family constitution cannot be very strict. It must allow for change. Otherwise, no one will pay it any importance. And last, family assemblies are very important. Okay, earlier we talked about the family council. So they're the ones in charge of making sure that everybody is happy, that conflicts will be resolved. But at the same time, you have to make sure, include in your family constitution, that at least there be one family assembly every year. And what is a family assembly? A family assembly is basically that time when everyone, all family members are required to meet, okay, are required to physically meet and have some sort of interaction. Okay, so during family assemblies, normally there's a report on how the business is doing, because again, take note, not everyone, not every family member, not every shareholder is working for the company. So some of them are not working for the company, and this is a good time to inform them what's happening. Okay, so family assemblies are very important. I would recommend for family assemblies that it be done in a very peaceful, in a very relaxed environment. So normally, I suggest to family councils or to families that are well off, I recommend that this be an annual vacation for the family actually. So let's say all of them goes to, let's say, Palawan or Boracay to enjoy, to enjoy, no? But just set aside around half day or maybe 1 day or 2 half days to reserve a function room, and so that the family assembly can meet and talk about business matters or family matters. Recently, just an interesting tip. Recently, I've heard that in other countries, they actually recommended families go on cruise trips together. Funny. I find it very funny. Personally, I love cruises kasi. So some family constitution advisors recommended that family assemblies go on a cruise because that way they have no choice but to interact with each other. Okay, so I end with this. How ti sing uru lan pito pito. So the palest ink is better than the best memory. So in other words, make sure that you write down your family constitution so that we can avoid confusion in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, attorney. That was a very, very interesting hour of discussion. I think it left more questions than answers for, I think, most of the participants that are listening now. And you know what? We've got a lot of questions for you. Are you ready for some questions, attorney?
Yes, yes. Again, I have to apologize. It took long, no? I was hoping to limit it to 30 minutes. And that's what I promised CFBCI. I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry. Napahaba. Dal talaga.
I don't think they minded, attorney. I don't think they minded. So let's go to the first question. The first one is, what if the parent or the founder or maybe the patriarch or the matriarch does not like to relinquish his position and turn over to the second generation? I think the context here may be that the second generation wants to have sort of a guideline on how to go about the constitution, but the first gen may have some resistance in saying that, you know, I'm still well and alive. Why do you want to phase me out already at this stage of my life?
Okay, that is a very good question, and one that is often met, no, in family businesses. What I would recommend in that case is to really have a sit-down, heart-to-heart talk and ask dad, ask mom, why they don't want to give you more responsibilities. Take note, I do not agree with giving full control immediately to the second generation. Okay, that's not my stance. My stance is there must be a gradual shift. Gradual, okay? Si banban tang in kwan, okay? And that's what I would recommend. Again, it's a gradual or banban swa kwan tang in. So, and that's where both parties, the first generation and the second generation, have to come to an agreement. And in my experience, if they really sit down and talk, I see naman that the first generation is willing to give them more responsibilities, to increase their responsibilities. But definitely, if you're asking the first generation to just give them control next week or next month or even next year, that's not advisable. Even me as an independent advisor, I will never recommend that. Because if the first generation still wants to work, that is their right. They built that. That is their right. So both parties just have to understand that, well, for the first generation, they have to understand that they have to slowly give some control. But for the second generation, you also have to understand that and accept that it is not realistic that you're going to have full control. Because again, your parents were the one who started that company. Okay, and it is their right. What I would suggest is, if you're a big company, professionalize it. Okay, maybe if the children are already old enough, mature enough, and I'm talking at least 45 years of age, no? Because that's, I think, personally, I think that's the good time or a good period to really have full experience. 40, at least 40 years old actually, if not 45, 40. Maybe you can, the second generation can now be the general manager or even president of the corporation, but the chairman of the board will still be the father or the mother. Okay, that's what I would suggest. Okay, so that at the very least, so that the day-to-day problems or the day-to-day operations will be handled by the child, while the overall direction of the company will still be controlled, or at the very least, the first generation will still have a say on the overall direction, because he will still be the chairman of the board. Okay, one alternative is the CEO, the chief executive officer, is the matriarch or the patriarch, while the chief operating officer, who handles the day-to-day operations, is the child. But if you're asking for my stance, especially if it's a, let's say it's a mid-sized family business, if you're asking my stance on whether or not the first generation should just give control to the second generation, I'm sorry, no. It should be gradual. Ban-ban swak kwantang in. Sikong Kuyet yan tangin. Because if nagkamali, actually it's also for it's actually for the benefit of the first generation. Why? Because for the benefit of the second generation. Because if your parents suddenly give you full control, okay, and normally I see this attitude with young people actually, with mga 20s, early 30s. If your parents suddenly give you full control of the family business, and then nagkamali ka, pumalpak ka, who will they blame? Diba? You. Ang lalabas, mayabang ka. So if you're in your 20s, in your early 30s, my best suggestion, try to gain more experience. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying wait a little bit. It's not going anywhere anyway.
Okay. For the next question, attorney, medyo marami, so I'll just combine some of them that might be relevant. What happens if a family member challenges the signed family constitution and claim that he was coerced to sign? That's a very interesting question also.
Okay, that's why it's important that you sign all of this as a family, so that in case someone alleges that you have witness, you can actually, assuming this goes to court, you can actually have witness. Dinutsiyang lang tangkong, or you voluntarily signed that. You were not forced in any way. I guess this is also where the benefit of having external advisors, because then they will be an independent witness to prove that this was signed voluntarily.
Okay. Next one is for family members not part of the business, what should be the minimum entitlement, granting that they have their own personal business?
Again, this will be on a case-to-case basis. It's hard to say what the minimum is, because if you're a Taipan, of course your minimum is different from my minimum. Diba? I'm happy driving a Toyota. You might not be happy letting your kids drive a Toyota. So it will be on a case-to-case basis. But at the very least, I would suggest minimum, okay, for the average person, for the average business out there, at least a minimum standard of living. Okay, so definitely education for the children, up to a certain budget. Okay, I'm not saying, I don't recommend a clause that says the family business will pay for the education of all children. No, I don't recommend that, because that's prone to abuse. What I recommend is, let's say 100,000 per child stipend, 100,000 per year per child stipend for the family business as a minimum. Or you can also do it as a 100,000 per family. That might be more fair, because if one family has 12 children, luging-lugi naman yung may dalawang anak lang. Diba? So again, the minimum will change. It's very case-to-case basis. But I recommend at the very least education. At the very least education and groceries. If talagang di kaya, groceries, monthly groceries. I don't recommend cash. I often recommend groceries. Let's say 50,000 pesos worth of groceries every month, or 20,000 pesos worth of groceries every month.
Okay, we have a lot of questions. I'll try to put them in as much as possible. The next one is, what happens if the founder of the company, the patriarch or the matriarch, after signing the family constitution, decides not to follow it or scrap it altogether? So tapos na yung usapan, but for some reason the patriarch doesn't want to push through with it. What happens now?
Okay, then as I said kanina, again, a family constitution is really an agreement between the family members. Not everything is legally binding. Okay, what will be legally binding is the shareholder agreement. In that case, again, everyone has to sit down and talk. Bakit? Why did dad suddenly not want to follow the family constitution? And normally, there's a reason why. Okay? Sometimes, what I feel, or from my experience, I feel like oftentimes there's a miscommunication. No offense, please don't get me wrong. Again, please do not get me wrong. But what I'm saying is, it seems like the first generation has a different way of communicating than the second generation. And also, the third generation has a different way of communicating with the first and second generation. For example, my wife is pregnant. No? She's actually giving birth next week. When my son comes out, I'll be the type of dad who tells him, I love you, son. Good night. I love you every night. That's the type of father I'm going to be. But for my dad, who I hope is not here, but my dad is different. Okay, my dad does not tell me. I've never heard my dad tell me, "Kangoy at hindi na." I've never, for people our age, your dad will most likely not tell you that. Kangoy at hindi na. Tosya, you will not hear that. Diba? But, hikam din now pa ibot yan, diba? Boa, diba? You're sure din sa din now pa yan, diba? The same way you love your own child, you know your father also loves you the same. It's just that the way they communicate it is different. So that's what I feel with mga problem cases that come to us. Ya siyong mo si inkong wet hong la. Kasi usi lao pele kong kakyong ka for some reason ka sensitive. Or sometimes soon ka-sensitive, na-hurt agad, galit na. It's oftentimes I feel like that's the main problem. It's a miscommunication because each generation has a different way of communicating. So try to really sit down and talk. Because if you ask me, should the second generation or the third generation file a case against dad for breaking the family constitution? I'm sorry, I grew up in a traditional family, Chinese family. My answer will be no. And I do not represent those kinds of cases. If you're going after your own father, your own mother, my conscience cannot hold that. And if I was the independent advisor in that family, I will say, no, you're the one at the wrong. At the end of the day, you have to follow the patriarch's wishes. Again, that's because I grew up in a traditional family, Chinese family background. That's also why it's important that you have you pick your advisors well. Again, I might not be a good advisor for other families.
Okay, attorney. Maraming natamaan sigurado sa sinabi mo about being sensitive for the first and second generation, I'm sure.
I'm really sorry, don't get me wrong. It's just, iba talaga eh. The way they communicate is really different.
Yeah. So the next question is, how many percentage shareholding can challenge and move to change the family constitution? So I'm assuming this question is for already in place na siya, and probably for one reason or the other, merong gusto magpalit. So how many percentage does it
normally, okay, so again, case-to-case basis, it can be a majority, it's up to you. You want unanimity, pwede. But kami, at least, we recommend a super majority. Two-thirds. That's what we recommend.
Okay. Next question is, if the second generation or some of the family members are apathetic or walang pakialam sa future ng company, are they still going to be part of the constitution? Maybe that's a question here.
Yes, they should still be part of the constitution. Because if they're apathetic, then that means that they don't have plans of going to the family business. But take note, just because they have no plans of going to the family business does not mean that you can take their shares away. Okay? It does not mean that they will no longer be owners. Because in the Philippines, we have the rule on legitim. Okay? So they will, if your assets are purely shares, they will still be entitled to shares. And they will, in other words, they will still be owners. They will just not be part of the management. Okay? So that's why kanina, I mentioned you have to differentiate owners versus management. Okay? Those are two different concepts. So they should still be, yung owners will be part of the annual family assembly. Okay? While those who are in the business, they have their own whether board meetings or executive meetings.
Okay, let's wind down the questions here. I'm going to combine the two questions here. So, first question, is what if the founder decides to turn over two illegitimate children, number one, or number two, to people, to illegitimate wives is the second question.
Okay, so for illegitimacy, remember, under Philippine law, your illegitimate children are entitled to one half of whatever your legitimate children will receive. That's under Philippine law, okay? So again, an illegitimate child is entitled to one half of whatever a legitimate child may get. Okay, so scenario one. Scenario one is what the question is basically. What if the dad wants to give shares to the illegitimate child? Or what if the mom wants to give shares to the illegitimate child? Then the second generation or the next generation, they have no power to contest that. Okay? Because that's the right of the father or of the mother. Okay? However, you can also sit down and talk. And that's what I recommend for the family constitution. You can also sit down and maybe include the family constitution. That maybe instead of shares of stock, the illegitimate children can get other assets instead of the stock. Similar value, but not shares, so that they don't get ownership of the company. If that's the principle of the family, that they only want legitimate heirs, okay, pwede naman. Kasi the choice on what type of asset to give lies with the father or the mother, lies with the one who's giving it. So if instead of, let's say, 100 million pesos worth of stock, you decide to give a property that is worth 100 million pesos instead, pwede yun. You just have to make a will. Okay, you just have to make a will. Yeah. So that answers the question.
Okay, the last question na tayo. So the last question is, what if the parent, after turning over the position and responsibility, now decides to get involved back again? What to do?
Again, first of all, ako kasi, whenever, at least kami, when we do family constitutions for our clients, who are normally corporations, we always make sure that the father is the chairman of the board. Up until he really doesn't want it. Or even when he doesn't want it, sometimes we convince him to just stay on board as long as he is physically able to do so. Just so that he still has a position in the company. Now, if let's say he really left the board, he really left the company, and then he wants to come in, again, both sides have to sit down and talk. If you're talking about, okay, we're talking about family constitutions kasi here, but if you're talking about legal remedies, then the question to ask is, who holds a majority of the shares? Because if it is still the father who holds a majority of the shares, then, he can do whatever he wants. He wants to go back in. All he has to do is call a board of directors meeting, and he will get back in. So it's always best to talk about this peacefully. You have to ask Dad, why do you want to come back? And if he really wants to come back, again, simply because of my upbringing, of my background, I always side with the patriarch. I tell the kids, why don't we let him come back? It's not as if tinatalsik ka. He's just coming back. And in my experience lang, in my experience lang, if the second generation gives out a very clear, well thought out business plan to the father, oftentimes, around 70% of the time naman, the father agrees to it at some point in time. It may not be immediate, but after a while, oftentimes they do it. Okay, oftentimes they do.
So, all right, attorney, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much to everyone who participated today. Maybe siguro, just to wrap up everything, just to tie up what attorney said early in the presentation, maybe all of us maybe want to have a Gucci bag, but I don't think, let's pattern ourselves to what happened to the Gucci family. Is that a good way to end it, attorney?
Yeah, very good way to end it. Oo. Just one last note, sorry. I saw in the questions, one question, no? Which is, what if talagang times have changed, the father is no longer fit to work, and the kids want to take over, then in that case, you have no choice but to go file a legal case against your own father. Sad to say, if that's really how you decide, you have no other choice. And if the shares are still with your dad, then the law will be with him. But if the shares were already transferred to the children, then I'm sorry, dad, you have to give in to the children.
All right, I'm sure there are a lot of more questions here. I think there's some questions regarding how to view this offline in a later date. I think Carol of CBFCI will give us a link on where we can view this in another platform. So on behalf of the Chinese Filipino Business Club, Inc. and Attorney Kesterson, thank you very much for joining us today and hope to see you soon in all our webinars. Stay healthy, stay safe, and God bless.